My name is Diane Wellborn. I am the Ombudsman and I am your host for this evening's program. Tonight our topic is going to be the Montgomery County, Ohio Ex-Offender Reentry Program. I know that's a mouthful, but basically we're going to be talking tonight with the two task force co-chairs about the work that's been going on for several years to help ex-offenders reenter society right here in Montgomery County. I'd like to introduce my guest to you and then we'll dive in with questions. And I want to remind the viewers that this is a call-in show, so you can join us and present to us your question and we'll get it answered here on the air. I have two guests joining me this evening, the co-chairs, Commissioner Debbie Lieberman. Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Great. And Judge Walter Rice, federal court judge. Thank you for coming and co-chair of the task force.
Pleasure, Diane. Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you all and to talk about this important topic. I know that you all have spent several years actually on the task force in preparation and doing much of the committee work for that. Before we dive into all the work of the task force, I'd like to hear a little bit about why you two, who are very busy people with a whole lot of things to do, why did you choose to team together to work on this topic for the residents of Montgomery County? Debbie, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, the easy answer is because Judge Rice asked me to.
Okay.
So that's
all right.
the easy answer. But also because it's really the right thing for us to be doing. When you look at the county and the amount of dollars that we spend in criminal justice, and when I learned the background of recidivism in our community and where it was heading, it was kind of a simple thing to say, hey, wait a minute, this has to stop. And so it's something that I've become passionate about, that I think based on best practices that we can make a change, and we are making a change. And so it was one of those things that it was the right thing to do, and so that's why I did it.
Oh, good. Wonderful. And Judge, from your point of view, how did you decide to give your time to this?
Well, Diane, it occurred to me one day that I was having in front of me for sentencing in court the grandchildren of people I sentenced when I first became a judge in the early 1970s. So it was obvious that we hadn't broken the cycle of poverty and the cycle of recidivism. Second, many times when I sentence someone after they're released, they come back, they talk to me, and they tell me they need a job. If they could just get a job or a place to live or a driver's license restored to them, then they could make it and they wouldn't have to resort to criminal activity. And so often those barriers aren't removed, and 4, 6, 8 months later they're back again, not because they're bad people, but just because they have to be able to earn a living for themselves and their families. So it occurred to me that with Commissioner Lieberman's help, we might be able to make a dent in this problem.
Well, good. We're going to delve into how we're making dents as we go forward here. Could you please provide our viewers a kind of an overview of the work of the task force and the committee structure and how you tackled working onto this problem? Then we'll ask some more details.
Okay. Well, the task force had members of the public and private sector, heavy with public sector members of the criminal justice system, parole officers, probation officers, judges, lawyers, prosecutors, defense counsel, and the like. And we tried to identify each and every barrier that confronts an ex-offender returning to the community. Barriers such as employment, legal issues, housing, social services, and the like. We divided ourselves up into 7 subcommittees, each one to deal with, to confront a particular barrier, and then we combined all of our findings in a task force report. The key is that one solution alone will not solve the problem. It has to be a holistic approach where we deal with an ex-offender's housing, employment, social services, substance abuse, mental health needs. And with that holistic approach, we feel we can make a significant impact on that person's ability to come home, reestablish himself or herself in the community and become a tax-paying, contributing member of the greater Dayton area.
Wonderful. With respect to the report was issued when? When was it issued? About a year ago?
Almost 2 years ago.
Almost 2 years ago. But it is still available on the county website if people want to go and either refresh or read for the first time if they don't know that it's available then. So it is. That's wonderful. Can you talk about is there a general profile of persons that, ex-offenders that are returning to Montgomery County? Is it mostly men? What can you tell us about generally what do the people look like?
Mostly men, but a growing number of women.
Okay.
You know, and every type of crime that you can think of. And, you know, they're coming back. Every zip code, actually, in our county is represented by returning citizens. So, you know, it's a very diverse and large group, actually, every year, about 1,500.
1,500.
Really, I would only indicate that men account for about 90% of the returning citizens, we call them. Women are an increasing percentage. Women in the criminal justice system used to be a rarity. Unfortunately, they're no longer so. Most of the people that come back to the community have educational deficiencies, 6th, 7th grade reading and math skills. Many of them have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and the like. Really, all of the factors that caused them to commit criminal activity in the first place, they take with them to prison, and unless these issues are addressed within the prison setting, and often they're not, they come home with all of that baggage intact, undiminished, and now with the felony, a prison record.
Right. I guess I'd like to come back a little bit, to touch on this now, maybe come back later in the program to it. You mentioned some of the issues that lead to incarceration to begin with. Does the task force take as part of its scope to prevention efforts and identifying some of those, or is that just more than this group can bite off right now?
To answer that, we have not done that. A little bit of background is how did this come through the county. One of the things that the county does through our Human Services levy is our Family and Children First Council. It's funded by the levy, and this whole, the task force and now the policy board came through the Family and Children First Council. So Family and Children First has 6 different outcome teams, and we're working with those outcome teams, you know, holistically, you know, how do we prevent crime? How do we prevent citizens of Montgomery County, you know, from getting in that pipeline? So to say that we're not, as a policy board, dealing with prevention, we're not. But we, as a county, we are through FCFC and other outcome teams.
Okay. All right. Wonderful.
Diane, may I
please,
interject?
go ahead. Yes.
Our grants that fund us are limited to working with and helping those coming out of an Ohio prison into the community. So we are limited by the terms of our funding as to what we do. But we hope in the near future to expand into working with juveniles. Those who have come through the juvenile court might still be on supervision, 18 to 21 years of age. We hope to work with existing probation departments, which do a wonderful job, to prevent people from coming back into the system. We hope to work with people who may not go to prison at all. Maybe they're confined in the county jail for a while, placed on community control or probation without going to prison. But in order to expand our reach, so to speak, we need to expand our funding base.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the barriers to employment for ex-offenders. What have we learned through your task force work and experience that are some of those barriers, and what are we trying to do about them?
Well, there are so many barriers. As the judge mentioned before, I mean, the reason that they got there sometimes is you know, a big barrier, whether it's drug addiction or you know, lack of education. You know, there's just every ex-offender has a different story, and they're all very unique. And so the barriers, whether they don't have a license when they get out, whether they have back child support, you know, the list goes on and on. You know, so many people, they've never worked, never held a job, and may not even have a high school education. So the barriers are big. We know employers like to have people with, you know, clean records. And so one of our tasks is, first of all, some of the barriers are unfair barriers, and we call those the collateral sanctions, and that we could spend almost a whole hour talking about all of those. But as a state, Ohio's getting much better in recognizing those barriers that aren't really fair and changing those. So we are encouraged about how we can help them overcome barriers.
Right. I don't want to take too long on the collateral barriers, but maybe for our viewers who don't know what those are, maybe if you could toss out a few for us. What are some of those? Okay.
Well, these are such barriers as if you're convicted of a drug crime, where a motor vehicle was at all involved, then you can't obtain a driver's license. There used to be a barrier that if you have a felony record, you couldn't be a cosmetologist or a barber. There are about 300 laws in the state of Ohio which forbid people with felony records from getting certain licenses, engaging in certain occupations, and the like. Certainly, I understand that a convicted embezzler should not be welcomed with open arms as a bank teller, but there are 1,000 other things that that person can do without being automatically disqualified. Perhaps the major barrier for employment, Diane, if I can go back to an earlier question, is that this is such a buyer's market for new hires today, that, quite frankly, employers don't have to hire ex-offenders. If they need new hires, there are plenty in the community that don't have what is seen as a stigma on their record. So what we have to do is help the ex-offenders, and incidentally, this whole program is for those persons who want to help themselves. If they want to help themselves, we're there to help them. We need to help the ex-offender get job training, develop special skills that would make him as valuable as, if not more so, than someone hired just from a classified ad or off the street.
Okay. And again, just one follow-up question on those other barriers. Is your policy board looking at making recommendations to the legislature to change some of these?
Absolutely.
I assume that would be a next step to be doing some of that.
One of the teams is the legislative team, and we've been fortunate that we've been able to learn through what's going on in the rest of the state, and there is a gentleman in Cincinnati that has a whole now software package with all, you put in what the offense is, and it pulls up for you what the collateral sanctions are and the barriers, and it's, so, you know, we're progressing as a state. We really are. I mean, we're leading the country in the work that we're doing in ex-offender reentry. So we're encouraged by the steps things that have happened in the last few years, and we're continuing to lobby, and you know, the judge mentioned the barber license. The bizarre thing was, several of our institutions were training people how to cut hair, but yet when they got out, they couldn't get the license. From right. So that one's been fixed, but there's many others, simple ones that could be fixed.
Okay, good.
One of the
If I could ask you to hold that thought, we have
Certainly.
a caller that wants to join us. Hello, you're on the air at the Ombudsman Program. We'd like to hear your question. I'm sorry, caller, you're not coming through. It's very garbled. Can you try again? I think he or she
Lost
will
him?
try again. I think that person disconnected, so go ahead.
I was just going to say that one of the roles of the task force, which by the way has now morphed into a policy board to carry out the recommendations of the task force, one of our major goals is advocacy. Advocacy before the legislative branch on laws that we feel ought to be changed because the way they are constitute barriers to successful reentry. Advocacy to the community at large and to employers that ex-offenders are an untapped resource, that those who have gone through certain programming, who are drug-free, have received counseling, are every bit as qualified to become productive citizens, good employees, as anyone else. So it's a constant process of advocacy.
Wonderful. The caller is trying again, so go ahead. We'd like to hear your question. I'm sorry, I can't make that out. Perhaps if you can give it to somebody in the studio, they can help us get your question. Something's wrong with the line. All right, so we will move forward. So it's advocacy both at in the individual level and then also at the policy, at the legislative level to get some of those things taken care of. Can you each describe for us some of the best practices that you encountered as you were researching this important issue, and then some of those that we, as the policy board, has decided to implement here in Montgomery County?
Well, I can start by saying we spent several years looking at best practices as a body, and you know what we tried to do was base ours on an approach that, as the judge mentioned earlier, is pretty all-encompassing. You know, it's not just about finding a job for someone, because we can find someone a job, but yet if they haven't addressed several needs or as many needs as they have, then they're not going to be successful in getting that job. So that was one of the things that stood out to us, is it has to be more than just let's find someone a job. It's a much bigger task than that. We looked at different types of structures for one-stops, and that's what we have ended up having is the Office of Reentry at the Job Center. So we modeled ours after some throughout the country. And you know, we've just learned so much, and we continue to learn what other states, cities in Ohio are doing, and you know, we're not ashamed to copy them, actually. So, and that's the point of best practices. I mean, we want to make sure that it fits for here, but you know, are there other things that we could be doing that we could tweak and make better? So that's what we're doing every day.
Right.
The key is many people throughout the country say jobs are the most important, and our research has shown us that as important as a job is, what good is it if a person has no place to live? What good is having a job and a place to live if he can't get to the job because he has no driver's license and the job isn't on the bus line? So literally it is a process of identifying every barrier that this particular individual presents and trying to address all of those on a continuum, a holistic basis, so that not only will he have a job, but he'll have housing, he'll have a way to get to that job, he'll have a way of dealing with his drug problem, any mental health issues.
Okay.
Diane, you mentioned something before, and I'd like to maybe clarify one of my earlier comments, and that's on advocacy. It's advocacy to the legislature. It's advocacy to an employer, perhaps, or a landlord on an individual client. But it's also advocating to the community at large on the benefits to everyone of helping ex-offenders help themselves. Because we are financed primarily with public money, which is fine, but public money always goes away after a while, as it should. And if the community isn't primed, if the community isn't on board to accept these programs as beneficial rather to the entire community, the programs will die. So it's a constant process of advocating on behalf of ex-offenders generally as a group to the entire community.
No, thank you. That's. I hope this show can help
take
that step for us as well. Let's talk a little bit more then about the Office of Reentry at the Job Center. I believe it opened earlier this year. Did it?
Opened a year ago.
Okay, opened a year ago, and so folks are welcome to walk in, call, make an appointment, come down and talk. Well, let's say it's the relative, the mom of an ex-offender. Are they able to initiate something with that office and hopefully then bring the offender in, or does the offender need to be the one coming forth?
Well, certainly our staff says, let us help you.
Right.
We've had parents and spouses call, but we have to have the ex-offender come in, certainly, to get started. But the office has, we have 3 employees, and as the judge mentioned earlier, we're funded with a federal grant, and the number of people that they've seen has just been incredible. And again, everyone that comes in has a little bit of a different story, so their needs are different. But if you want to get someone to get there and you need to give them that nudge, we certainly encourage that.
All right. And so when the person arrives, they can expect some form of assessment that is on both the educational level or perhaps the any mental health need or any issues of addiction, and then some connections being made to those resources in the community. Is that what they can expect to find?
Yes, but there's more.
Okay.
The new paradigm of reentry, the new model of reentry, is that it doesn't begin just on release. It really begins at the time of sentencing, where the individual sits down with his or her lawyer and drafts a reentry plan that's approved generally by the sentencing judge. The reentry plan follows the individual to prison, where it's reviewed by the case manager and the offender. Some 3 to 6 months before the offender is due to be released, persons from the community come into the prisons and start working with the ex-offender on such issues as where will you live, where will you work, do you have any mental health or substance abuse issues? The idea being that when the ex-offender returns home, he has a reentry plan that's just about ready to be executed. A visit to the Office of Reentry will tie that reentry plan or place it in concrete, and the ex-offender can then go to the various services to which he or she is referred.
Okay.
So reentry starts prior to the arrival home.
And the Department of Corrections is working with the policy board and policy boards around the state on these types of plans, so everyone gets a plan is developed for everyone.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. Okay.
Well, and I will say this, that the Ohio Department of Corrections has been a great partner for us from the very beginning.
It's true.
We've been very fortunate, and they saw us then as a leader, and so we've been able to learn a lot and use their expertise. And the assessment tool now is one that is going to be throughout all of the different facilities in the state. So, and that will be very helpful.
Okay, good. An assessment tool.
I was just going to say the Office or the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction has been enormously helpful. They have realized that you can't build enough prisons to put enough people in to house the persons that have to go to prison. So their goal is to prevent anyone now in prison from returning once released. So they are helping by way of guidance, by way of some funding, to develop all of these initiatives that we're working with the ex-offenders on.
All right.
The state really wants to see reentry work, because they, as the judge said, what got him inspired, they see the same thing, the same people over and over. And so they've gone from just housing the prisoners, to having a Department of Reentry, a whole division with people, and it's just very encouraging to see that, because they believe in reentry.
Well, it seems like it's quite a good turning point for for our community and across the state, communities across the state with this. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the recommendations that flowed from the task force to the policy board, and what kind of activity is going on with some of those recommendations now. Either one of you.
All right. Commissioner, I'll let you start.
Well, one of the recommendations was to have the Office of Reentry.
Okay.
So we've accomplished that.
Good.
We are continuing to work on advocacy, as the judge mentioned. We believe that our voice was heard on a lot of changes that took place in this last year at the state level. We were also tasked with, coming up with the educational model, and how can we better work with, whether it's Sinclair, or how do we make sure that, as the judge mentioned, when they get their plan, how are they meeting the goals that they need to meet? Are they getting their GED? So each of our different categories was tasked with a different responsibility and job. We've talked, you've probably had homelessness people on here, and where we are in our, of course, and halfway through our 10-year plan, how does reentry work with them? And so we've got a lot of collaboration going on there. Part of the task, the report said, let's talk about jobs. Where do we find jobs, but what can we do as far as creating jobs? And so the judge has been leading a group to look at social enterprise and how can we create some jobs out there. So, the report tasked us with many tasks, and we're working through those one at a time and checking them off the list.
Okay. Are there some that stand out as some of the most difficult portions of this work, either to convince the public about, or to get a system to move in a different direction?
I would say there are two that come immediately to mind. The first is employment. Again, there is a shortage of jobs, so employers don't have to look to ex-offenders to fill the employment roles. And we need to develop a system, we're working on this, it's slow going, where we provide a mentor for each ex-offender that is employed. The mentor might do nothing more than just counsel someone on basic life skills, the need to be at work on time, how to dress, how to react when a supervisor says you're a little bit short of doing the job that you need to do. Then we have to have that mentor many times serve as a go-between, so that there's a problem on the job, the employer or the supervisor can call the mentor, who can then counsel the employee. What we're trying to provide an employer is, quite frankly, a better qualified candidate than he or she would otherwise have access to. Housing is difficult because a lot of private landlords, for no reason other than they just won't rent to ex-offenders. Public housing is limited to ex-offenders. So a lot of people, quite frankly, have no place to live unless it's what they call couch surfing at a friend's or a relative's. A lot of ex-offenders become homeless. Driver's licenses. A person can get a license suspended for a number of reasons, one of which is failure to pay child support. We don't condone what led to the revocation of a license, but we're working to try to establish a system where a payment plan entered into by the ex-offender will allow limited driving privileges. So things around employment and housing are critical. We already have some, not enough, drug and alcohol counseling centers. We're woefully short on mental health facilities. We need more adult educational facilities. So I would be misleading if I told you that all of our recommendations are in full bloom and working beautifully. A lot of them are still in the startup category.
And also, many of the recommendations that you've just listed there would go a long way to to assist a lot of people in our community who are not ex-offenders who have the same problems.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, solving it for one part of the population would be helpful, such as payment plans and some of those other.
You're right.
And you were going to say.
Well, I was going to say, because it came to mind when the judge was talking, one of our goals in having the Office of Reentry, we've accomplished this year by having East End Services got a contract through, it's called Pathways Out of Poverty, and they were able to train a certain number of people to do deconstruction. And the city hired, had some contracts, and the county had some contracts. And so we were able to actually, for East End, assess people, make sure that they were the right kind of person for the job, and then they hired them, and then they were doing deconstruction work. So we were very pleased with that we were able to use the Office of Reentry for exactly what we envisioned it to be used for, is getting people hired, and qualified for the job that they were going to be trained for. So that was it was a win.
Well, that is a wonderful example, because then they get the job on the site, they get job training, job experience, they have an opportunity in a setting that helps them transition to another employer.
And that's key, because beyond the Pathways program, which is excellent, we're trying to develop a bank of transitional jobs where a person can work 4 to 6 months until the job in effect is over. That gives a credit, so to speak, on one's resume. It gives a work history. It accustoms the ex-offender to the world of work, and we think that's a wonderful first step toward permanent employment.
Okay.
That was one of the best practices we learned when you talked earlier about, what are some best practices. Transitional jobs are big, because so many people may not have ever worked. And so by getting that transitional job and getting that experience and having someone say, hey, they came to work every day, on time, they're a great worker, that's the key right there.
And they have a reference and they have experience after that. Wonderful. We talked a little bit about the number of people that are returning to Montgomery County and the previous and the costs that had increased for the county, with a proportion of the county's revenues that needed to go to pay on this particular issue. Are we able to measure some reduction yet? Is it too early?
It's too early.
It's too early.
It's
Okay,
too
we're going to
early.
have these programs going longer before we can see the
Yes.
financial impact.
Right.
Okay.
I think we mentioned it that the county's budget is 74% for criminal justice, and that entails all the courts and the sheriff, and but it's still very broad, and as you pointed out, it's gone up substantially in the last few years. So this is a piece of it, but we believe if we can do what we set out to do, bring down recidivism, of course, then they won't be going through the jail and they won't be being arrested. So
I think that's accurate. Two things. It's too early for hard statistics, but it's not too early for anecdotal evidence that we're making an impact, because we review the jail lists every morning. And the numbers of our clients on the morning jail lists have plummeted, which is a good thing.
Great indicator.
It is.
Yeah.
Secondly, I don't want to underestimate the horrific costs involved. And I'm talking beyond the human costs to the victim, the ex-offender, and his or her family, which are enormous. I'm talking about hard dollar costs. Criminal justice budgeting is not subject to being slashed as a waste. These are constitutionally mandated services that must be provided. So if we don't do something and do it quickly and successfully, the criminal justice budget will be the tail that wags the county dog, if you'll pardon that poor analogy.
Right.
So these are desperate issues.
Right. And coming at the same time, I'm sure you all are facing the challenge that many of the nonprofits that might be providing some of the adult education and the drug treatment and job shadowing or transitional are also facing a very hard time. A couple of those I noticed from the report that were serving ex-offenders and were available to help them have even closed in our community. So tell us how the office and the policy board is kind of getting their arms around that.
Okay.
Well,
it's a hard one. I'm sorry. It's a hard question.
Right.
And the services, I think you're probably referring to the Urban League and Booth House. And the Urban League was very helpful in the reentry world. We have other grassroots partners that are out there doing similar work. So I'm not going to say that the void has been filled, but there are many community programs that are out there still. As far as Booth House, that too was very disappointing because that was a nice transition for a lot of people. And there are others out there, but it's a challenge every day to find that transitional housing for people as they come out. So I don't know that void has been filled, but it's one that I know that the state and our local people, it's a challenge every day because we don't want them ending up homeless. And so
going from one system to the other.
Right.
These were two horrific losses for the community generally and for the ex-offender community specifically. And because our grants are so limited in the services we can render, we can't really, even if we had the person power or the dollars, fully replace Booth House with our own efforts. We can't fully replace what the Urban League has done. That was a tremendous loss. And that's where some of the nonprofits and the grassroots organizations come in. And that's where community advocacy comes in. At the moment, these grassroots organizations aren't part of the grant because there are a tremendous number of hoops, audits, certifications that have to be obtained. What we need to do by advocating to the community is get the community in a position where they will recognize, with or without our help, the absolute importance of some of these nonprofits, those that have closed and those that are struggling, and empower them to step up and do the work they do best. That's an unfinished agenda item, but one we are committed to.
All right, good. I'm glad to hear that. I've been handed a note that asked the caller's question. I guess they got through finally, which is very good. Is there a how successful are prisoner reentry programs? That's very open-ended there. And then secondly, is there a difference from first-time offenders and repeat offenders? I think the questioner there may be trying to get at, is it easier to work with a first-time offender rather than someone that has multiple offenses? So I'll just toss those to you all for
Sure.
Okay. I would say it's harder to work with a repeat offender, but certainly not impossible or even extraordinarily difficult. An employer or a landlord is going to look more askance at someone who has several felonies on his or her record than at someone who's just offended once. But keeping in mind that whether a person has committed one felony or three or a half dozen, it's usually not that they're a bad person or someone that should be put aside and never loaned a helping hand to. It's someone who has all of these barriers that a first offender has, and we've itemized them many times during this hour. So multiple offenders, yes, have some additional barriers, but most of their barriers are those we find in less serious felonies or first offenders. Yes, they can be worked with. And as far as, and I think successfully, as far as are the programs successful, They've been successful in areas of the country that we've tested. We've mentioned it's too early to give you hard statistics, but anecdotally, I think we're making a difference.
Good, good. I'm glad to hear that. I'd like to spend a minute to talk a little bit. You touched on it briefly about the whole issue of financial reentry. Reestablishing a bank account, dealing with the being garnished for what had happened before. What are some of the ways that the working groups and the policy board are looking at removing some of those financial barriers that hold people back?
Well, in the current grant that we have, a piece of it is mentoring, and we've contracted with a group called Circles, and they're known for doing exactly what you said, helping them in financial. I mean, so many people probably never had a bank account, and maybe never received a check, and so those are the kinds of things that this group is helping with. That's the goal, is to kind of wrap around, put a circle around the person to help them be fiscally independent at some point in their life, because that's now some people though that may come to us perfectly fine, they don't need that help, but that is an area that is of concern with many people.
Okay. Yes.
Diane, one thing that neither of us mentioned when you were talking about the typical profile would be poverty. Crime is economic. Most people who go to prison, not all, most people who go to prison are from dire economic circumstances. The commissioner's answer was right on as far as mentoring for financial responsibility and the like, but the best mentoring in the world is not going to remove a judgment, is not going to remove a driver's license withheld because of unpaid fines, or remove child support obligations. So one of the things we hope to do, if not directly, if not through legal aid, then perhaps through one of these grassroots organizations, is to provide legal clinics where someone who would qualify for legal aid could go and say, here's my financial picture, it's a mess, it's preventing my getting a job, and that volunteer lawyer will help start payment plans, work on the child support, not to absolve it, but to reduce the immediate payment necessity or reduce the percentage so that a person can get a driver's license, can establish credit, and can get a job.
Okay, thank you. The phone system may not have been working, but the callers and questions are still coming in. The next person asked, how can my church get involved with this program? So what has been the, I guess I'll broaden it and say, what has been the involvement of the faith community, and how can churches participate?
That's one of the things that I learned early on, is so many churches have their own programs that they were out there doing their own thing, whether they had one church member that was an ex-offender. So the churches have been a great help to us. In fact, we have a whole group of clergy that meet and are focused on this. So I would encourage the church to give us a call and let us know how they'd like to be involved, and we can certainly get them involved.
Okay. Good.
One of our subcommittees on the task force was a faith-based caucus, we called it, that would suggest ways for the faith-based community to get involved. We have a staff of 3. 3 people can't mentor 1,500.
No.
The mentors have to come from the faith-based institutions. Faith-based institutions can mentor the families of ex-offenders while the ex-offenders are in prison, just working with them, keeping them close to the church, synagogue, or mosque, helping on visits to their loved one in prison, and then when the ex-offender is released, mentoring the family, integrating him into the broader congregation, to try to help him or her get started. The faith-based community is critical.
All right. So to get their church involved with this, they can first look within their membership to see what need is already there, and then reach out to the Office of Reentry.
And I'll give you a number at the end.
Okay,
so
good. We'll get that so
okay.
people can write that down. Can you inform me and the viewers a bit about the role of the alternative courts, such as drug courts and mental health courts, and how do they intersect with these efforts?
Well, the drug courts, mental health courts, veterans courts, reentry courts are something that they've sprung up in the last 5 to 8 years. And if a person has a drug habit that the judge feels is the competent producing cause of the crime having been committed, that person goes to drug court, either in the municipal courts or the common pleas courts. And special emphasis is placed on drug treatment, staying on medications, working the program through Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, and the like, to try to deal with what the judge feels to be the single biggest cause of the crime. Once a person, and they're invaluable, and they do an excellent job, and the judges should be commended for them. Helping people who are coming back from prison, there is no longer a pending criminal action, so there would be no need for a reentry court. But I know in federal court, our supervisors for people who come out of prison and the Adult Parole Authority for state prisoners have concentrated programs, not courts, so to speak, because again, there's nothing pending against the person, but programs that will deal with mental health, substance abuse, lack of education, and the like. So we're not necessarily working hand in glove with the reentry courts. Once we expand our services to deal with people who perhaps don't go to prison, are put in the county jail, then released and put on probation, then I can see a great deal of interaction.
Okay. And also wanted to ask you, at the beginning of the program we touched a bit on the juvenile justice system. Is integrating with that also down the road? Is that one of the longer term goals, so that we can prevent young people from going further down that path?
Absolutely. You know, we have in Montgomery County, we're very fortunate that we have a drug court and the juvenile court we also have a great diversion program. We have a great mentoring program, and so I can foresee us having reentry too. It's just one of those things. Again, right now, none of the reentry efforts are being funded by any county tax dollars, so it's a challenge to figure out where will that come from. There are, though, juvenile reentry programs all over the country, and we've seen those, and of course someday we'd love to be able to help, even if it's just 1 or 2, returning young people to our community. We'd like to be able to do that.
Well, this process has identified a lot of wonderful things to piece together, hasn't it?
Yes.
It certainly has. I wanted to also ask, we've heard of the continuum of care philosophy within the homeless system. Wanted to talk a little bit about how that in turn gets applied to the ex-offender reentry programs. What is on that continuum with these programs?
Well, really, Diane, we've covered probably 90% of it. Housing,
yes.
Substance abuse, legal issues, employment, social services, and the like. And when a person comes to the Office of Reentry, or when a person works up his reentry plan while in prison with the help of community volunteers, those needs of the ex-offender will be identified. A major need is family reconciliation. Half the prisoners in Ohio get no visits in a calendar year, and many times a person comes home as a stranger to his family. So family reunification, children and their issues. And in the assessment process, the ex-offenders, I hate to use the word needs, but the ex-offender's needs are discussed with him, and a cohesive plan is developed with him to be worked on, with the strong advice that, you know, you got to work on all of these. If you concentrate on one, that's fine, as long as you quickly get to the others. But if you're concentrating on one and feel that's as far as you have to go, you're just not going to make it. So it's a broad continuum of every service needed by an ex-offender.
Good, thank you.
And it's much like with the homeless. It's almost the same. I mean, the same kind of continuum of care. We kind of modeled after that, too.
Okay, very good.
And do I have time?
Go ahead.
Yeah. The key on a continuum is to eliminate the number of case managers that an individual has. A person with multiple needs, perhaps in the past, has visited multiple agencies, each one of which has given him a case manager. Very quickly, you find a need to coordinate the case managers to help this person. Our goal is to have one case manager, and I think this is the homeless system's goal as well, that will follow a person from start to a successful conclusion.
Right, good, good. We don't have a lot of time left, but I did want to find out where people should call. If you got a number, we'll take that. And
I do have a number.
Okay.
The best number to call that I can give you right now is 225 4015.
4015. Is this the Office of Reentry?
We will get them
We
connected
get them to
immediately
that.
to
All
the
right.
Office of Reentry, yes.
Okay, very good. And that is the place that people should call. And then I wanted to offer, in the last few minutes that we have here, an opportunity for you all to provide any closing thoughts or questions that I should have asked, and I didn't ask you, what you would like to say to the viewers about reentry.
Commissioner, I'll let you go first.
Well, you ask a lot,
Okay.
and very thorough, and you know, it's something it's not a simple answer, and you know, every day we learn more. Our Office of Reentry learns more. We learn about other programs that are in our community. That was one of the things early on, that you know, there's so much going on, and yet it felt like we weren't having a lot of outcomes. And so, you know, we want to have great outcomes, and I think if our community, if everyone comes to the table, we can continue to see those numbers go way down. So, you know, you've asked most of the tough questions. I think the challenge is, you know, continuing to advocate, continuing to have people be willing to give people a second chance. Right. And hire people. And so, you know, that's something that we're working on every day to make sure that, you know, this county's a place that people can work and feel safe in, and we can, you know, give everybody a chance.
Before we turn that question, or let you give your closing thoughts, Judge, I'd just like to say that this, I think, is a process that brings out a lot of hope. I think there's a lot of hope throughout all of this and the things that you all have mentioned. And before we wrapped up, I just wanted to ask if an organization wants to become involved with the policy board, how do they do that? Do they call the same number? Just call, because you are open to having other people join and come to the table, because there may be someone watching.
Well, we need to know what resources are out there.
Right,
you know,
right.
And we want them to be involved.
Okay, great, thank you. Closing thoughts?
Well, an excellent interview. I wish I had had time to talk about the education piece, where a person's education needs will be evaluated, and that person will be put on a diploma track or a degree track, or maybe a trade track, where they can go to schools like ISIS, the CTC, in order to get employable skills. I think there's something in reentry for every citizen of this community. Number one, it's absolutely the right thing to do. Commissioner Lieberman is right on with that. We need to help people who have made mistakes, who aren't necessarily bad people, who legitimately want to help themselves. Secondly, the impact on the bottom line of county expenditures will be tremendous. And thirdly, at root, this is a public safety issue. If you can take someone who has offended in the past and help that person become a contributing, law-abiding, tax-paying role model of a citizen to his children, that person is not going to be doing criminal activity, and community safety will increase exponentially. So wherever you are on the political spectrum, the ideological spectrum, wherever you are on reentry generally, there is something in this program that we submit would appeal to you.
Okay, well,
And
thank you.
we have a motto, and that's that no one from Montgomery County should ever return to prison and be able to legitimately say, I wanted to do the right thing, but there was no one in the community, nothing in the community to help me.
It's a very powerful motto. Very well said. That's excellent. Thank you both very much
Thank
for
you.
a very interesting discussion here. A lot of information, and I know that the Policy Board has its work cut out for it to follow through on all the many excellent ideas and recommendations and find the funding to do that. So I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks.
I'd like to thank the viewers for watching tonight. I'd like to thank the callers that called in and gave us the interesting questions. I'd like to remind people that the phone number to call is 225-4015, and if you aren't finding a pen or pencil, you could always call the Ombudsman's office and we'll keep this number for you. So thank you for joining our program tonight. Good night.